Welcome to Sam Outside. I'm Sam and I'm outside. I'm outside forest bathing. Yeah, as a term, it's a direct translation from the Japanese word Shinrin Yoku. So perhaps those two words put into English don't do the practice or the experience justice. For most people, forest has one idea. The word bathing, very different idea. So a better way to put a experience into our language might be forced immersion. How's that? So today I'm outside trying to connect with myself, trying to connect with my environment, which doesn't always have to be nature, and a forest is one part of nature. So yeah, nature connection can happen in any space. Where there's an ecosystem and a habitat and other life forms interacting together. But there is some science that is studied and proven to have incredibly beneficial results specific to a forest as a form of nature. And when it comes to forests, not all forests are the same. So we understand now that what the healing does to the human body after 20 minutes to more than 2 hours in a forest can do for us. It has to do with how the trees communicate with each other. They communicate messages about healing themselves and, primarily other members of their own kind, but not specific. Other trees hear it and can understand the language. So what they're sharing with each other are the phytoncides. The phytoncides, a volatile chemical, meaning airborne chemical. It's the byproduct of photosynthesis. So as the trees are, bringing in daylight and air and nutrients through their sap, that miracle that is photosynthesis that happens within the leaf, the byproduct of that creating energy, simple sugars for the tree, the building blocks for more living matter. The byproduct is oxygen and traces of water vapor. And it's on that water vapor that there are some essential oils. Now, those oils are slightly heavier than the air, so they are falling. And as they are caught on the wind, those essential oils, or phytoncides, are communicating messages of how that tree is managing, dealing with, healing as a result of maybe it's a bacteria, maybe it's a fungi, maybe it is a signal to harden off if there's a fire nearby, and that the smell of smoke is telling those coniferous trees to tighten up and protect their seeds locked in a cone that may survive the fire when the host tree might not. It's also sending messages to start preparing themselves for an infestation, certain kinds of beetles or caterpillars, things like that. So these things can be studied in a much easier way in closed conditions with more simple forms of vegetation like a tomato plant, right? So there are a number of studies out there on other things that help us understand how airborne chemicals are transmitted from plant to plant and to other living things like insects and birds. But the phytoncides, slightly heavier than the air, are constantly falling and they're landing on our skin, being absorbed into our eyelids, into our lungs, into our sinuses. And those messages that the trees are sharing with each other are meant to trigger immune responses. The same thing happens in the human body. Now, our body can produce a very specific kind of cell, a natural killer cell. And our body produces them as a way of fighting off cells that are different, cells that are damaged, cells that might be corrupt and the body doesn't need. So it's going to target things like tumors and cancers and viral infected, bad stuff. So phytoncides are being studied. The effects of spending time in, more specifically, coniferous forests being studied for cancer research. But stress management is where it started. So not all forests are the same. Now, specifically coniferous trees have a, call it more dense or heavier type of phytoncide, and the chemicals are more specific in a pine tree as it relates to what it does to the human body, per se, than a deciduous tree like an oak. So the terpenes from an oak will affect our body differently than the pinene from a pine tree, both found in the phytoncides, the airborne chemicals, but studies have shown that the exposure to pine specifically has a scent, the essential oils that we're smelling and inhaling, that is directly linked to a sensation of calm, reducing cortisol, and just a slowing down and an overall, call it connectedness, right, with self and the environment. After 20 minutes, ideally 2 to 3 hours. Spending time in an oak forest has a slightly different response because of the call it the terpene chemical that it's more associated with the phytoncides from that particular species, red oak in my area. That has a similar connection to the body in that it heightens our sense of awareness, our oneness. So there's our sense to become more attuned. All right. So we'll have a heightened sense of sound, smell, sight, movement, color change. All these slight variations are in that type of forest, and that's just how the trees communicate. And so there's a different need for the trees to share a response because they've got a different chemistry and different relationship with each other and the other types of trees that might grow in that environment. So the type of tree will have a different chemistry, and that will have a different response on the human body. So these things are being studied, and it's absolutely fascinating. But at the end of the day, it's all good stuff. Time in nature, time in trees, around trees, has amazing positive effects physically, mentally, and emotionally. And at the end of the day, it's stress management, right? Lowers cortisol, regulates blood pressure, lowers blood pressure, regulates heart rhythms, gives us access to daylight and fresh air, which increases serotonin, which is a good thing. We're getting a little bit of exercise. So over 20 years ago, Dr. Qing Li studied the effects of phytoncides. And again, closed studies, right? Just pumping specific harvested phytoncides from around Japan into hotel rooms where there was zero stimulus, but the patients or the contributors to the studies had high levels of cortisol, chronic stress, and after a couple of days of just being exposed to very specific amounts at a very specific interval of very specific phytoncides, cortisol dropped, awareness and promotion of NK cells, natural killer cells, was increased. So when you've got enough of a case study to change how the government reacts to stress management, that's a study worth reading. So that's where the foundation for forest therapy and forest bathing began, with those studies of phytoncides in Japan in the 1980s. And it's still happening. And what's exciting for me is that the organization GIFT, the Global Institute of Forest Therapy and Nature Connection, GIFT, they are actively looking to recreate those studies from the 1980s here in Canada on Canadians who suffer the same ailments, but in Canadian forests, because there might just be a difference between how a Canadian white pine differs in its phytoncides and effects in the human body relative to a Japanese yew or a Japanese cedar, that was used and studied, in the 1980s. So yeah, it's pretty exciting to think that although all of it is good, there might be a reason for spending more time among hemlocks or among firs or among spruce or among pines. And there's several different kinds of pines or spruce or fir in the area. So it's worth the time and the resources to do the research and figure out how we can optimize the human experience for stress management when it comes to spending time in a forest. because it's not all the same. So it's all good. So I encourage you, go outside, walk under the trees, smell, look, listen, feel. It's all good. 20 minutes, a couple times a week, you'll feel the difference. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.